Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Serving Extraordinary Hospitality. We're excited to have Steve Motion, Director of Sales and Marketing at Venga, with us here today. He's going to be discussing 3 ways you can craft a personalized experience for your guests at scale without having to spend hours behind a computer. Steve comes to us with 12 years of experience in the restaurant industry, helping full-service restaurants grow revenue through personalized service, reputation management, and effective marketing. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. First, this webinar will be recorded and emailed to everyone, so keep an eye out for it in your inbox. And second, please submit any questions you have throughout the webinar in the Q&A chat box. Steve will be taking questions at the end. Now let's begin. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and hello, everyone. As Sarah mentioned, I do have 12 years industry experience. I work for a range of large companies in the casual dining, in the hotel sector, from TGI Fridays to Pret A Manger to Radisson and Ritz-Carlton. And I transitioned into the technology sector about 10 years ago, bringing that experience with me. And I'm excited to be working with Venga, who can enhance experiences within restaurant operation businesses. Today, as Sarah mentioned, I'm going to be talking through 3 ways that you can create an exceptional experience for your diners, hopefully without spending too much time behind your computer. And those 3 ways that we're going to focus on today are personalizing experiences in the restaurant. We're going to take a look at targeted and, most importantly, relevant marketing for your databases, and also how to turn feedback into an action. So the first thing we want to look at today is delivering extraordinary hospitality. But we don't talk enough about how we actually get there. And the reality is that personalization is really the key here. You know, no 2 guests are the same that walk into your businesses. But fortunately, it doesn't have to be too difficult to be able to craft a way to personalize those experiences to your guests. Systems are getting smarter. We've got access to way more data than we used to, and that data can be made actionable. The key here is to really try and scale the ability to deliver personalized experiences, not just to those 1 or 2 guests that you recognize coming in on your busy shifts, but try to scale that across the majority of guests that come into your business, even if it's their second visit. We want to be able to help automate some of your tasks and intel that you gather. And ultimately, by coming up with a process, you can bring all this information together in one place. So today, I'm going to share some sort of tried and true methods for creating more of these personalized experiences throughout your guest journey. And we'll also explore what extraordinary hospitality looks like in practice, using some examples from restaurant groups that we work with currently, and also some industry leaders. So I thought it would be interesting for us to take a poll, first off, to be able to see who out there is a member of a loyalty program that is worth talking about. I mean, a program that you would tell your friends about. So if you just take a few seconds just to respond to the poll on your screen right now. And loyalty is hugely important. You know, we shop in different stores. We become loyal to brands that we really enjoy. But how many of those loyalty programs actually make a difference? The one that I'm most familiar with is an app that I have on my phone for a coffee shop. I use it all the time. I make sure that I get my stamps every time I go there to be able to claim my free coffee after I've been there enough. But is it really worth me telling my friends about? Looking at the results, the majority of people have said no, they don't have a loyalty program worth talking about or sharing with their friends. I think experiences are more important than loyalty, and sometimes I get challenged on that. But I do have an example. I was flying with an airline, transatlantic, recently, and I've got status on that airline because I do fly quite often for work between the UK and the US. And I was flying in coach or economy, and one of the members of the cabin crew came up to me whilst I was on board, and they said, thank you so much, Mr. Motion, for traveling with us. You're actually our only gold member that's on the plane today, and we want to make sure you have the most amazing experience. And I was taken back. Obviously, they use a system to be able to keep up to date of who on their aircraft are loyal travelers, but I was greeted by name. The cabin crew mentioned my status. They offered to relocate me and upgrade me to a different area of the aircraft. They said, we have a note that you like to sleep on your flights. Let me go and grab you a pillow from first class to make you more comfortable. And we have a note that you like a full bottle of water. So here's a large bottle for you to keep with you throughout the duration of your flight. And I felt like the system wasn't getting in the way of my experience. I felt it was seamless. I felt the service was genuine. I felt appreciated as a customer. And, I'm telling this story to you as well as I've told many of my friends and family that I really enjoyed that experience. I wasn't flying in first class, but I was a loyal customer to that brand, and they delivered an amazing experience that allowed me to tell a lot of people about it. So this got me thinking about ways that personalization is used across multiple industries, and obviously we're talking about restaurants today, and how it turns a happy client into a real brand advocate. So did you know that 75% of diners said that they would be more likely to attend a restaurant that recognized them by name or recommend options based on past preferences and purchases? Now, to me, that's not surprising, but in this particular piece of research, the majority of people came back and said that this is what they expect when they go to restaurants these days. Now, personalizing the guest experience organically increases diner loyalty, and that's what I was referring to in my airline example. And if you think about another example, I used the example of the coffee shop. So it's actually the Starbucks app that I have on my phone. They know that when I go to Starbucks, I always order Frappuccinos because that's the coffee that I like. Maybe not in the winter when it's too cold, but majority of the time I order Frappuccinos. And I decided to get one of those based on them sending me a push notification because they know it's personalized to me, and I'll walk to my nearest Starbucks and I'll grab one of those coffees. Now, that coffee shop only has about 3 or 4 minutes to then wow me, and sometimes they do, sometimes they get it wrong, but in a restaurant experience, we've got quite often 2 hours, sometimes more, maybe a bit less, to be able to wow our guests and use that time to be able to deliver them a hyper-personalized experience. And why should we be doing this? Well, there's a million restaurants out there. They're all providing an amazing hot food and cold drinks to their guests. But are they all providing this personalized experience that they can go on and tell their friends about? You want your restaurant to obviously stand out from the crowd, and loyal guests are super valuable, and you want to make them feel as appreciated as possible. So my thought here is you want to be able to foster brand advocates. Keep those diners who love coming into your restaurant talking about you and telling their friends. And whether they visited the first time or whether this is their second or third time back into the restaurant, keep them thinking about your restaurant long after they've had dessert in the building. Like loyalty matters, recognition does too. But how can you actually put that into practice in the restaurant? A lot of people say to me, personalization can be difficult. It's Saturday night, I've got a line of people out the door. But we're not trying to really change the way that you do business. We're trying to make small enhancements to be able to deliver hyper-personalized experiences at scale. And you need some tools and you need to implement some processes to be able to achieve this. So you'll need to, for example, know each and every guest, and gather as much intel and notes and guest codes as possible. So fortunately, if you use OpenTable's Guest Center, you're able to put some guest tags against those reservations and those profiles. I've worked in restaurants before where it's been the responsibility of the host. I've worked in restaurants where it's been the responsibility of the server to be able to gather this information. And you can do it manually. So, for example, one of the restaurants I used to work in many years ago, we had a rule that if any check was over $600 for a four-top, you would print an extra copy of the check, and you would make a note on the back of who that guest was, and you would give it to the host, and they would update the tag on the reservation system to say that this is a big spender. You can do the same for wine lover. Another one I've seen is friend of owner or other things where guests have actually ordered a lot of cocktails. You can tag them cocktail lover. Now, this is great because the next time that they come in and dine with you, you've got this information. But the problem with having a manual system is often that day-to-day gets in the way and it's not always consistent. Fortunately, with Venga, you can automate some of that by being able to identify people's frequent purchases and automatically tag them or their visit behavior. But you can do it manually, as I said. So you want to keep tabs on guests' likes, their dislikes, their preferences, and you can discuss those in your pre-shift meetings and keep track during service using your profiles in OpenTable. So in your pre-shift meeting, being able to talk about who's coming in, if they've dined with you before, being able to see if they've got any preferences. In Venga, we can overlay some additional information like their social media information, so you can see how many followers they have, you can see their LinkedIn profile, but actually using that data to deliver a hyper-personalized experience. What we don't want to do is use that information and then go over to the desk and go over to the table, and say, oh, well, welcome back, Mr. Smith. We know that you had this Pinot Noir last time. That comes across as a little bit creepy, but being able to use the knowledge that he's ordered Pinot Noir before to be able to recommend a fantastic new Pinot Noir you've added to your list, you know that he's going to be more likely to accept an offer to try it. Put in as much information as possible into the profile. It's the best way. And I understand it gets busy in service, but if you do place emphasis on this in your restaurants, it can go a long way. Matching a server who is from a particular state that the guest is from, you can see that potentially. Assign tables to guests with higher Instagram followers. So if they take a lot of food shots, you can seat them on a table by the window, make sure it's the most well-lit table, so those food shots look amazing. When I used to work for Ritz-Carlton, for example, we were incentivized as a team to capture guest preferences and feed those back to the department to log into the system, and that might be something you might want to consider in your restaurant. But building these profiles does allow the in-dining room experience to be customized, and you recommend a wine you know they like, sit them in a booth because you know that they like a booth, and be able to customize their experience based on what you know. Because ultimately, you want them to give you a 5-star review online once they've finished their meal experience, and then obviously that will promote more people to come and dine with you. A great example of this kind of personalization in action actually comes from one of our clients, Boca Group. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but they're a James Beard award-winning Chicago-based group. They've got over 15 locations, and they take personalization very seriously. So they focus on the pre-shift report with Intel to make those personalized recommendations, the wine, the dishes, and so on. And their operations manager said that it's literally changed the way that their staff operates, giving them much more information to work off of so that they can provide those personalized experiences at scale. And that's the key point here, is at scale. So gone are the days of having a maitre d' on staff who works on every shift and being able to memorize all of their guests. The restaurants now have an opportunity to be able to introduce technology to offer a consistently personalized experience every time, regardless of who's on staff. And I actually experienced this firsthand when I was working in a restaurant in London once. We had maitre d' or head host who they actually got injured in a skiing accident, and then they were not in the restaurant for a few weeks. And we struggled to be able to deliver those customized experiences because it was all that reliant on one person knowing all of those guests. So my top tip here really is decide on what intel is most important for your restaurant type. So 4 or no more than 5 key data points, and then build a manual or automated process to be able to support capturing that data. Our next poll I wanted to ask you is, when was the last time you received a marketing email that inspired you to take an action that wasn't just move that email to the trash can? Because we are in an era right now where we're receiving email communications like crazy from companies trying to sell things to us. We've got our notifications from Amazon where we are making our orders online and everything's coming into our inbox. It becomes a very crowded place. And it's really difficult for especially restaurant operators to get communications out to their databases that is really relevant and allowing them to be able to get that guest to come back. So it's actually quite an interesting split. So the last time that you received marketing email that inspired you, I've got a majority split between last week and last month, with the minority being in last quarter. So looking at frequency, that's obviously a huge part of sending out marketing communications. But the next thing I wanted to focus on is actually making your marketing more targeted. Now, gone are the days of doing blanket email marketing. It just doesn't work. I have personally about 3,000 unread messages in one of my email inboxes. It's the account I set up to receive communications from companies. And the way I look through that is going through and looking for interesting senders and email subject lines that capture my attention. My friends and I, for example, we always booked large parties. I'm a perfect candidate to send emails about the private dining room. I only open messages that have a relevant or catchy subject line. It's okay to use an emoji. It really does capture people's attention. It's expressive, it's current. You can include my name in the subject line if you know it in your database. Restaurants really get my attention when they know the type of dishes that I enjoy, how often I dine with them, and which locations I prefer, because quite frankly, they're the most relevant to me. The proof here is really in the data. So did you know that personalization delivers 5 to 8 times the ROI on marketing spends, lifting sales by 10% or more? And I was actually thinking of including another poll here to ask who on the call wants to increase their sales by 10%, but I know the answer's all of you, so I thought I'd continue without a poll. But if we are sending communication to diners that take into account their behavior, they're more likely to then take action. So whether that action is make a reservation, because obviously we want them to commit to dining with you. It could be to buy a gift card if you take or sell gift cards. Maybe the action is respond to a special offer, come in and celebrate a special occasion with you. So understanding this information and making those communications personal is the most important thing. Why do we want to do that? Well, that's simply just to keep your restaurant top of mind through all of the email communications. So follow up with diners to evoke an emotional response and remind them what it feels like to eat at one of your tables whilst they're at home at their own table. Make your diners feel special and connected with your restaurant, and you can do that in a number of ways. I actually like to receive emails that are updating me on seasonal menu changes, because I've got restaurants that I love and enjoy and I go to frequently with my friends, but when they've got a new menu launch, I know that I want to go and try it. So being able to communicate in that way is certainly valuable. And sending these emails will continue to foster brand advocacy, because overall, if the marketing is relevant, then that will lower your unsubscribe rates when you're sending out these communications. And obviously, we want to keep nurturing those. So how can you create this kind of marketing? Well, segmentation we've talked about. Remember, we were talking about guest tags. Well, if your front of house teams are tagging the guests in OpenTable to be able to understand guest behavior, then we're able to market to specific segments of those groups because we've already tagged the guests. As I mentioned, we're also able to do that with Venga, so we can automate things like visit frequency, VIP tagging if guests have left feedback or not. But understanding that segmentation is key, we need to implement a process to segment. And this is where all of that hard work gathering the intel actually pays off, because you can set up automated campaigns, not just lists that you have to pull manually and export and send through your email service provider, but you can set up automated campaigns that are triggered by an action. So you can develop campaigns that deliver the right message to the right audience at the right time, like a We Miss You campaign. So identifying that maybe a guest has dined with you once in the last 90 days, but not in the last 30 days. So you want to be able to remind them, we are still here. So send them a We Miss You campaign. And it doesn't have to be a discount. It just identifies the fact that they haven't made a reservation in some time and you'd like them to come back. You could do a menu item campaign, which may be specific to a wine dinner that you want to put on. Pull a list of all of the guests that have ordered that type of wine before and invite them to your wine dinner that you're about to put on. Being able to target by menu item is very powerful for a couple of reasons. Both of them generate revenue. The first is with your guests. because you obviously want your guests to come back in, receive relevant marketing, react to that marketing. But secondly, you could do some promotions with some of your suppliers and be able to track back whether those guests have actually ordered those items after they've received that marketing campaign. So an example is a restaurant group that we work with works very closely with liquor suppliers to be able to get sponsored liquor vendors for their summer cocktail program. So being able to pull lists of guests who've ordered gin cocktails before, market to those guests, set up a brand-specific menu, and then be able to track those campaigns back to where the guests have actually ordered that cocktail are really important. Obviously, the connection, there's so many channels these days to be able to reach out to guests. There's email, there's social, there's SMS. Use the ones that are most appropriate to your business. And frequency really does depend on your brand. A great example of relevant and targeted marketing strategies in action comes from another group that we work with, the Garcis group. They really do focus on lapsed guests. That's a big area of concern for them. So they were able to generate over $250,000 in ROI by sending out these automated campaigns. And you set the parameters, as I mentioned. So it could be someone who hasn't dined in the last 30 days but has in the last 90 days or 6 months or whatever you decide. But as soon as someone fulfills that criteria, an email is fired off to them to encourage them to come back. And with Venga, Garcis had the ability to actually track that back to a guest coming in and spending money in the restaurant. So what items they ordered, as I mentioned before. You too can run similar campaigns. You can export your guest list from OpenTable, and you can segment them based on the last time they dined with you, or you can automate it via Venga. But the data is there for you to be able to utilize this. The easiest guest to get back into your restaurant is someone who has been in, they've had that amazing experience, and they know what the product is like. So if you can get those to come back, they're going to be a quick revenue generator for you if you get the messaging right. My top tip really on this is about frequency, because you don't want to get unsubscribes. Quality over quantity is the key. Another way to do this is targeting your top spenders, for example. So let's take a traditionally busy service like Mother's Day or maybe even Valentine's Day, where you know you're going to be busy. But if you pull a list of all of your top spending guests and you email them first to tell them that your menu is available and you can make a reservation, and then you can email the rest of your database perhaps a few days later, then that way you're going to enhance the revenue from a traditionally busy service anyway by inviting the guests that spend the most to come in and make that reservation. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is exceptional experience for your diners and taking action on the feedback that they give you. So these days, it's just not enough to pay attention. You have to have a strategy to be able to take that action on the feedback that they give you. And it's a very tricky one with restaurants because there are so many platforms out there that guests go to be able to leave their pieces of feedback, whether they are particularly loyal to leaving OpenTable reviews. Are they very loyal to going on to Yelp or TripAdvisor or wherever? It can become a minefield for an operator to be able to manage all of those platforms. One of my personal pet peeves is only seeing negative reviews get replied to when I'm looking on these websites to decide where to go, because if I've taken the time to be able to write a review, and sometimes I do, put time aside to be able to give feedback to restaurants, being in the restaurant business myself, I want to know that my message has been heard. Worse still is long argumentative justifications for service failures, because honestly, that being able to start an argument on some of those websites, it's so easy because the guest has had a negative experience and they want to vent about it, and then you've got maybe an assistant manager who's worked that shift and it didn't recall those line of events happening in the same way. But it's really important to be able to take those communications, thank people for their feedback. And there's a few ways that you can do that. We are human. We like social proof. One of the interesting things is 4 in 5 guests actually reverse purchase decisions based on negative reviews. And I was a victim of this recently. I actually purchased a flat screen TV online, and I spent about 3 hours reading reviews. I was flicking between different pages, and I'd seen a great deal, and then I read a review that was like, the sound is terrible, or there were issues connecting to the Wi-Fi, and I didn't purchase that TV. I continued my search, and I found another one, and I did end up making a purchase. But negative feedback will most certainly have an impact on your bottom line. So understanding that will affect revenue and building a process into your business to be able to deal with those negative pieces of feedback and acknowledging the positive ones is really important. Don't be afraid to really hear that feedback, because it does matter. Feedback trends obviously help you track your restaurant's performance from the perspective of your diners. Proactively requesting a guest's opinion of their experience shows that you care. And a lot of restaurants do this. So whether that's a service that you send an SMS to if you get a post-dining survey, Venga offers a post-dining feedback that's customizable, and you can put all kinds of questions inside there. But use feedback as an opportunity to encourage return visits. Get ahead of the feedback. One of the best things about having a process is understanding that when you receive a piece of negative feedback, you do have an opportunity to turn it around. Someone went to the trouble of telling you that there was a service failure in some way, so you do have the opportunity to turn it around. So if you build a process, you can try to reduce the negative reviews that end up online. So whether that's coming up with something on your website to be able to capture feedback post-dining, whether that's a comment card on the table, that is still something that allows you to be able to capture information at the point of the interaction. But try to reduce those negative reviews that end up online. And the most important thing is, if it is online, try to spot trends. Now, being responsive does make a massive difference. One of the things that we do at Venga is we actually can aggregate reviews and allow the restaurant operator to manage that feedback. So whether you do it through a service like Venga or whether you do it in an Excel spreadsheet, it doesn't really matter. But as long as you are looking at aggregation of the information and you're able to analyze it and come up with an actionable output. So an example of this might be, lots of people are giving feedback that the bartenders are short pouring their cocktails. Obviously, that's not great. You want to be able to identify who that bartender is and work out exactly what the issue is there. Other things that we see is like common maintenance issues. The AC is too cold when Sarah, the manager, is on duty, because she's naturally a warm-blooded person. She always puts the AC on, but our guests don't appreciate that. So understanding this type of information and being able to action upon it is the most important thing. And it's very easy to be able to look at reviews and try and go and do the digging and go into your point of sale system and work out who served that table to be able to give feedback to that server. But it could just be a maintenance issue. It could be something to do with the restrooms. It could be something to do with the exterior of the building. The light bulbs have gone out. This feedback is so valuable for you to be able to deliver that amazing experience that you want to in the dining room. So another example of this is when you do aggregate the data into one place, is being able to spot trends. And we had one restaurant that uses Venga. They made an update to one of the recipes of their dishes. And through the analysis of Venga, they were actually able to see that there was too much salt in one of their revised recipes. And as a result, they were able to sort and filter their reviews by a particular date. They identified that the change happened after the recipe relaunch, and then they reverted to the previous recipe. So it was using data to make decisions that were quite often from gut decisions before. Gathering feedback internally obviously can be done in a number of different ways, whether it's comment cards on the table, email, put a form on your website. That's obviously going to complement your OpenTable published and unpublished responses. Looking at websites like Google Maps is a really big one at the moment. A lot of people are just using Google Maps, so making sure that your Google profile is up to date, and as well as the other services out there that people use. Some people are very loyal to some websites more so than others. So understanding that being able to respond just to maybe your OpenTable reviews and your Facebook ones, if they're the biggest drivers for you, is the first step. You can use templated responses where you can to save time, but do personalize them with names before you publish them. So if you do have the ability to use a system like Venga to do that, just make sure you are personalizing the responses, because I'll go back to my previous comment. There's nothing worse than seeing reviews that aren't answered, the positive ones, but even worse than that is just generic responses. Someone has just copied and pasted the same thing all the way through the reviews. An actual case study of a restaurant group that works with us that use post-dining surveys is a group called RAM, and they've actually used the post-dining surveys for team member attrition, because it's becoming a huge problem across the industry, holding on to your top performers, stopping them from going and working with the next best restaurant that opens up down the street. But they actually use a data-driven approach to identify their next server to promote to a trainer, for example, or reward their team members for all of the 5-star reviews that they're getting. And it's not just about identifying your team that are doing things in a negative or wrong way. It's using the functionality or using your system that you've built inside your building to be able to understand how you can coach and develop those people and catch them doing things right. So in this example of RAM, they have a post-dining survey. They ask questions. In fact, I believe they change the questions frequently, depending on if they do a new restaurant opening, for example. They might ask some different questions about the ambiance and the lighting and so on, to be able to understand if that suits their guest needs well. But they do use this server scorecard idea about building out responses specifically to the pieces of feedback. So my advice here in regards to feedback is really pay attention to those review sites that you feel are the most important to your business. So go online, do an audit of those websites that you've got reviews in currently, and understand where the biggest impacts can be. Because ultimately, you want to be able to increase those scores, those negative scores. Let's say all of the scores are out of 5. If you identify that Yelp is trending at a 3.4, maybe that becomes your area of focus. If your Facebook recommendations are down, maybe that becomes your area of focus. But being able to tie those pieces of feedback back to a server is, I would say, one of the most important things, because without making those adjustments internally, it's going to become quite difficult to be able to turn your business around. One thing that people often ask me about in regards to reviews are reviews that are not genuine, and how to deal with these. And it's quite difficult, because some of these websites, they don't vet their diners, whether they've actually been and dined in your restaurant or not. Some people are just out there to pick a fight and get a free meal. And there's also some crafty competitors out there who might go on with fake profiles and go in and put in negative reviews to your restaurant. But unfortunately, this has just become something that restaurants have had to deal with over the years. And my advice is to kind of maintain a professional approach at all times. And quite often in those instances, just leaving a response to say, thank you so much for bringing this to our attention, please email me, I'd like to discuss this further, allows you to put forward a very positive response that removes that situation from online. And utilizing as many tools as possible to gather feedback from other channels is the key thing here, is being able to say, I would like to set up my own post-dining survey to be able to allow people to communicate with me and reduce the amount of negative feedback that ends up online. So looking over the topics that we've talked around today, we've covered those 3 areas. Technology is huge within restaurants at the moment. I personally attended the National Restaurant Association show in Chicago this year, and there's a huge increase in robotics, back of house. There's financial instability across some restaurants. It's a very difficult time for restaurants to operate. It's very competitive. But the most important thing is you want to stay current. And if you want your guests to come back to you, you need to recognize those guests individually, even if it's only their second visit, just recognizing that they've come back. As I said before, historically, when you recognize someone walk in the door and you give them a handshake and hugs for those really special guests that it's very difficult to be able to replicate that if it's just one person's knowledge. So coming up with a way that you can implement across your business to be able to scale is the most important thing. So businesses that personalize their service to guests, they're going to succeed. Include a personalization topic in your pre-shift meeting. I think that's a really important one. So being able to talk to your team about the importance of personalization. And if you haven't already, reevaluate the way that you tag your guests. And whether that is the manual system of printing a check and putting it on a spike and running through it at the end of the shift, or making it the responsibility of the assistant manager, or even delegating it to one of your team members who are doing really well at the moment. Make sure you've got a system in place to be able to capture this feedback. We are in an era of personalization. Wherever you look, you're receiving personalized marketing, probably right now, maybe in the side panel of the screen you're watching right now. If brands, the big brands that are out there in the space are doing it, then the independent restaurants need to be doing it too. So researching on diners online has become pretty much a standard practice. Identifying who your return guests are, doing some research, or have Venga do it for you. But take a glance on LinkedIn if you've got the guest name, or look on their social media. It will give you a reason to wow them. Understanding that someone's just had kids, or who their favorite football team is, or knowing that in advance and prepping your servers will allow them to be able to deliver that amazing experience. But my advice is really to keep it discreet. Don't say, I saw on your LinkedIn that you just got let go from your job, or you just lost some followers on Twitter. That's not the best way to be engaging with our guests, obviously. But using the information that you've got in the best possible way. So, like I mentioned, offering wine similar to what they'd ordered before. If you know that they frequently order a certain type of appetizer and this is their 8th visit to your restaurant in the last 2 months, why not take them a complimentary appetizer of that type and just wow them at the table? The truth is, if companies like McDonald's are personalizing their menus and marketing in the fast casual sector, the rest of us need to be doing it as well. If you are doing blanket marketing at the moment, I would ask you to consider your strategy. Obviously, we are all different businesses with different concepts, but being able to understand where the ROI is associated with your email marketing is huge. And if you're able to track your email that's been sent back to whether a guest has spent money in the restaurant, that is the best way to do it. I think certainly understanding segments like guests that have typically in big or dine with you in big groups. If you can pull a list from OpenTable of guests that always dine parties of 6 or party of 8 or more. If you have a private dining room, for example, pull that list and then do a campaign specifically to those guests to tell them to come and celebrate their next special event with you. Feedback. Embrace it and make time for it. That's my message here. If you delegate it to someone in your team, ensure that they fully understand the importance. It's not just, we need to do this, so I'm going to get this person to do responses. Let them feel part of that conversation and understand what the strategy is. Close the loop by tagging guests that leave feedback. So this is a great one. If you've got people who do go to leave feedback online, if you can go into OpenTable and put in a tag that says left feedback, next time they dine with you, you're going to make sure that your more experienced server is serving them, or you give them a better table or whatever, just to know that that person is likely to go online and leave a review, and that's so important to your business. And like I said, Venga could automate that if that's something you're interested in, but it does allow you to wow them the next time. So looking at some of the questions that people have sent in, I thought it might be a good time to answer some of them. Sarah, could you kick us off with what people have been asking so far?
Yeah, I have a few questions here. So what are the most popular tags restaurants can use?
So this really does depend on the concept. And one of the things I get asked is, what is a big spender? How can I tag a big spender in my restaurant? Well, it really does depend on your concept and what constitutes that spend for you. But big spender is definitely one of them. And you don't have to call it big spender. You could use a special code like big dollar sign or something. But putting that one in, I think, is important because these are the people that are going to be spending money in your business, and we're trying to grow revenue. Another one is VIP or VVIP. I've seen both. These are typically used for people who are of a certain threshold, like whether they are influencers, which is actually another tag I've seen, or whether they live locally, but they bring other wealthy people with them. That's another one. Cocktails is one I'm seeing more of. People like tagging that, especially cocktails. And then there's some other more generic ones. If you know, for example, that the guest is vegetarian, tagging them with some food preferences would allow you to exclude them from your meat and wine dinner.
Right.
So that's a good one.
Here's another question. So how do you determine the best time to send a lapsed guest campaign?
So ideally in this instance, you would use data to be able to come up with the answer here. So aggregating your data by dining dates, so who your guests were and the last time that they dined, and being able to see the time between their first and last visit is the most important thing. Take the average. I would say you can experiment here. You can take a segment of your database and run a test to see if maybe they become a lapsed customer after 3 months. Is that the perfect time for you? Send an email campaign to a cohort of your database to encourage them to come back, and then measure and then repeat.
And in that same vein, how frequently do you think we should be, or a restaurant should be communicating with guests with marketing?
That's a really good question. And honestly, if you don't have anything valuable to say, don't say it because you've got a quota of 2 emails to get out per month.
Right.
And I see this from a lot of groups, that they send out not necessarily personalized messaging. It's just, hey, it's summer. It's a reason. It's a reason to. I know it's summer, depending on where you live, but it depends on the brand. I would say 1 or 2 touch points a month is good, as well as special occasion emails. And maybe some event campaigns as well. So if you are running a special event and it's relevant to me, great. I want to receive that. A couple of other emails saying you've got, like I said before, new menu launches or updates to your additions to the menu or additions to your liquor program. That's always interesting. If you know someone is they don't drink cocktails and they don't drink wine, maybe don't send them updates. That's one thing that I see quite frequently, and I think as this trend of sort of lower alcohol beverages, sparkling, these seltzers and things becomes more popular.
Right.
I think leading with very liquor-heavy messaging isn't necessarily the best thing to do if you don't know that these people are big fans. So that's my advice on frequency.
With the post-dining survey that you mentioned before, what are some must-have questions in that survey?
So remembering the reason that we're asking these questions is to be able to aggregate the responses. So it's important to think about those questions in advance. I think being able to break them down into the different areas within the business is really important. So, for example, how was the service? How was the food? How was the environment? Those type of questions. But then I would also say asking questions that are relevant to that restaurant. So if you don't just ask generic across your whole group. If your restaurant has a particular feature that you wanted to get feedback on, but you customize those surveys per location, but have some key themes throughout the whole group that you're able to analyze. Technically, the fewer questions you ask, the better the conversion is going to be.
Right.
You know, you don't want to receive a post-dining survey with 2 pages of post-dining feedback. And again, comparing restaurants to the airline industry, I get these emails from another airline that's like, please spend 20 minutes giving us feedback on your most recent flight. And I'm like, I just don't have 20 minutes to spare. You know? So I think separating them into segments is really important. One thing I'm seeing a lot of people use is Net Promoter Score. Now, we're all, maybe everyone on the webinar is familiar, but the Net Promoter Score is where you rate a restaurant, whether you would recommend it to your friends between 0 and 10. And that will actually break down whether those people are detractors from your brand, whether they're really not engaged with your brand, they wouldn't recommend it to their friends, or promoters. And once you understand that about your diner feedback, you're able to actually then segment again the section of your database who's given you feedback that are not likely to recommend to their friends, and you can target those people with an email campaign to get them to come back. But I think Net Promoter Score is an interesting one. I'm seeing more restaurants after that at the moment.
Interesting. So another question that came in, they agree, you know, knowing a lot of information about your diner can be creepy. So what are some examples of like LinkedIn info that you would use to connect with a guest?
So interestingly with LinkedIn, you know, you're able to see someone's position, so what they do for work.
Right.
You're then potentially able to see which company they work for and which office they work for. So using that information in a restaurant example, if I know that they work across the street in that office building for that company, they are a local business, local customer of mine that works in a business that's local to my restaurant.
Right.
Maybe if there's an office there of, I don't know, 1,000 people, why don't I do a special discount or some kind of campaign to get more of those colleagues to come in and dine with us?
Right.
So using LinkedIn to spot trends, definitely one. Venga actually pulls in the profile picture from LinkedIn, so you're actually able to recognize these guests from their LinkedIn profile picture. And I think that's very helpful, especially if you've got new team members on the host stand who don't recognize guests that have dined in before.
Right.
And then looking at like the broader LinkedIn profile, you know, that is a communication platform. So are they on LinkedIn talking about the last restaurant that they went to? Do they work in the hospitality business? Potentially. So there's a lot of information you can get. It's just how you take that information to deliver that in-dining room experience.
Right. Another more Venga-specific question. Is there a Venga solution that integrates for hotels? So
when we say hotels, we talk about sort of the property management side as well as the point-of-sale side. We deal specifically with restaurants, you know, to be able to aggregate this information for the guests in the dining room. We have some integrations which can sync up information between our system and hotel property management systems.
Right.
But the system itself isn't for a full hotel for like rooms division. It's just about food and beverage.
Got it. Okay, so I think we have time for one more, and probably one of the most important. So how do you actually access Venga?
So if you are a current Venga customer, you can go to, I think the website, dashboard.getvenga.com. If you're not a current Venga customer, but you're a guest center customer in the US, I think you can sign up for Venga by navigating to its Venga in the left-hand navigation of guest center. That's how you would access it. If you are not an existing Venga customer, we can follow up by email after this webinar with some information to learn more and set up maybe some time to get a demo with one of the team.
Great. Okay, so I think that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks, to all of the other questions that came in. We'll do our best to follow up with answers where we can. Thank you so much to Steve for all of this great information and taking time out of your day. And thank you to everyone else for joining us. Look out for the recording coming to your inbox in the next coming days.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.